fellow engineers. Thank you so much for checking out the Home Recording Network. Welcome to day 6 on this 30-day journey to getting better home studio mixes. Today, we're actually going to start looking inside the mix. The first few days were all about pre-mix ideas and the setup of the mix. Now we're actually going to start to look inside the mix and see what we did to create this song or create this professional mix. Now, I do think everything I covered before today is extremely important. So if you missed any of those, it would be very helpful to yourself if you went back and checked those videos out. But for right now, let's just take a quick listen in case you missed it. This is the mix we are taking a look at this month.
These kings and queens, they all fall, they all fall. Headless back into destined unaware, just what will be done. Looking for treason and overtake the throne.
Yeah, so we're going to start diving into this little by little. And I'm basically going to take you through this, how I would actually go through the mix. So I start with drums. At the beginning of every mix, I always start with drums. Some people say to start on the master bus and then go to the vocal and kind of work backwards. I don't like doing that. I like starting with drums, moving to bass, then guitar, then keys and synth, then the vocal. I don't like the top-down approach. Some people like that and some people don't. It's really just a matter of preference, but everything I do is from drums up. But before we actually get into looking at how these drums were mixed, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about drum samples and drum triggers. Most of us know that drum samples are a big part of mixing in today's world, but I just want to point out that they should not be used improperly, and I'll show you what I mean by that. The first thing I want to say, and something I feel is really important for you to know, is that no matter what trigger program you're using, I use the Slate Trigger 2 product. Doesn't matter what you're using, but after you've kind of selected the trigger that you want or the sample you want, you should always bounce that to a WAV file. So if we take a look at this snare sample track, you're going to see that it's just a normal WAV file. It's not a track with the trigger program on the channel strip down here. And the reason why you should be bouncing your samples to a new WAV file is because those trigger programs are not 100% accurate. So you want every snare hit to be perfectly in time and in phase with your actual acoustic snare drum that you have in your mix. And after I bounce my sample track to a new WAV file, I will actually open up the snare top track and I will go and check out every one of these hits to make sure that all of these samples are aligned and in phase properly. If you have a miss trigger or an out of phase hit on any of these, it's just going to take away power from your drums. Especially with kick drum, it's very noticeable if there's a miss trigger or an out of phase hit. With snare, it's less noticeable, but we want to make sure the transient of the snare doesn't lose any power, right? Snare drum is very important in our mix. So it's just important to go through and actually check all of these sample hits out. And that's why we have to actually bounce it to a new WAV file so we can see that. And this is one of the things that the pros are doing that they're not necessarily showing you, because a lot of them have assistants to do this type of thing. Some engineers even have an assistant to go in and hand place all the samples because they don't trust the trigger software. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the level of your samples in the mix. So let's just listen to this drum kit real quick. What do you notice about this drum sound? It's a very natural drum sound, right? It's not too over sampled. So let's listen to just the kick and the snare drum, which both have samples on them. So let's take a look down here at what we have in terms of tracks for the kick and the snare. So I have a kick in and a kick out microphone with a kick sample, and these all end up at this kick bus. I have the snare top, snare bottom microphone, and the sample, which again end up at their own snare bus. So if I play this again and I mute and unmute the snare sample, you're going to notice when I mute it, yeah, the snare loses some power, but the snare is not completely gone. The snare sound isn't all sample. There's still a lot of the natural snare drum in the mix. So the sample is there to really beef up the snare tone, but it's meant to be additive, right? We want to add to our acoustic snare. If this was just all snare sample, it would sound pretty fake. And I'm sure if you've messed with samples, you've run into this. And it's the same with the kick drum. So I'll just play the kick and snare again and I'll mute and unmute the sample. You could tell that the kick sample is definitely beefing up the tone of the kick in and kick out microphone, but those two microphones are very much in the forefront. The kick sample is adding a bit of low end and a bit of attack to our actual microphones. But like I said, this is mostly just the regular kick sound. So, what I want to relay to you guys is just to go easy on your samples and actually work really hard to get your acoustic drums sounding as best as possible before you even add samples. You shouldn't be relying on samples for your drum sound because, again, that's going to come across as just super fake. You just don't feel that human element when you hear a drum kit that's made up mostly of samples because the sample replacement track just lacks the dynamics of a real drummer, right? They don't hit the snare drum the exact same way in the exact same spot every time. You want sort of that human element in your drum kit. Now, having said that and just negating everything I've said thus far, sometimes you do get put into a situation where you have to completely replace a kick or a snare. If it's just a garbage tone that you can't work with and you can't make sound good. Everything that I record in my studio is usually pretty good and I can make sound at least decent. But if it's something that's sent by someone else and they recorded it in their home, maybe the snare wasn't tuned correctly or it wasn't mic'd correctly. Sometimes that situation does occur and you have to completely replace the track. And that's a bad situation to be in. I really hate that. But sometimes, like I said, it is necessary, but it should be avoided at all costs. That's all I want to say about using samples. I know it's not the most exciting stuff, but it's really information that I feel that you should know. Tomorrow, come back for day 7. We're actually going to start looking at the kick drum and EQing the kick drum, seeing how I did that, and we're going to work forward from there. So I hope to see you guys back. Happy mixing, guys. Hey guys, if you like this video, be sure to download your free Ultimate Home Studio Mix Guide with your go-to EQ and compression settings for all your tracks. And also be sure to register for my free online mix training that I hold a couple times a week so that you can learn how to make radio quality music from your home without breaking the bank.